Good? Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. As Brian said, and thank Brian for the nice introduction. Been around a long time. That's why my hair is thin and gray. And seen a lot of these. I was just discussing a little bit earlier. A lot of people don't realize that it wasn't that long ago that South Dakota had over 3,000 school districts. And as early as the 80s, we had 387 school districts. And that number now, today as it stands, is down to 149 school districts. So the conversations that we're having tonight are certainly not new. They've been going on for a long time across the state. As our demographics have shifted to the Sioux Fallses and the Rapid Cities, and our farms have gotten bigger and bigger. The families have gotten smaller. This is a unfortunate reality. I grew up in a small community, Ethan, South Dakota, 10 miles south of Mitchell. It was a very small school. And my entire career, professional career, other than Secretary of Education, was in small schools. I finished my career at Sioux Valley, so a neighbor of yours, as superintendent there. So small schools are a passion of mine. I think that they provide an outstanding education. But there does come a point where we have to make a decision as a school district. Are we doing everything we can for our kids? And are we the best stewards that we can be for the taxpayers? Because taxpayers can only tolerate so much. And so what we're going to do tonight is try to go through some information, general information on what a consolidation looks like, what district reorganization could look like, because there are three different types of reorganization. There's consolidation, which pretty much everybody's familiar with. And obviously Oldham and Ramona went through this process in 1990, I believe it was. But then there's also what's called dissolve and attach, and I'll get into that. And then there is something fairly new in our state called a joint powers agreement. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Okay. Doesn't want to move forward. The pointer is working. Oh, no, we lost it. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so consolidation is when two or more school districts and the school boards prepare a plan, and the plan has to be approved by both school boards. It has to be sent to the Department of Education and peer, and they have a whole laundry list of things that you have to identify as the two consolidating school districts. If they approve the plan, then and only then it goes to the voters in both school districts. And the two school districts both must pass this, otherwise it doesn't happen. So if one district votes yes by 50% plus one, the other district does not, it doesn't happen. So ultimately the school boards and the administration and their committee that they would put together, they put together a plan, and they have to have a public meeting and take input from the folks, and then they edit it, tweak it, however they see fit. And then, like I said, it goes to peer, but ultimately the voters, all the registered voters in each school district, they're the ones that decide whether this happens or not. And some of the things that they have to talk about in this plan are attendance centers. In other words, where are the students going to go to school? And we're going to talk a little bit about an option that the two districts would have to build a new school somewhere between Oldham-Ramona School District and the Rutland School District, somewhere mutually agreed upon in between there. We're going to talk about that, but that can't happen until the consolidation is voted in, and then you would have to pass a bond to build that school. And we're going to talk about that, but there's going to be a period of time from the day the consolidation takes effect and when a school could be built. And so in the meantime, the consolidation plan is going to have to talk about where are the students going to go to school. Name of the new district, I think that one's pretty simple. Oldham-Ramona and Rutland is your co-op that you've been using for a long time. And I would say that we see this across the state. It's very, very common where districts that have been co-oping for a number of years and they get along and it works well, it oftentimes leads to a consolidation. We've got a lot of examples of that across the state. Transportation, how will that be handled? The configuration of the new school board. So if the plan is voted in and approved by both districts, you'll have a new school board. Both of the old boards will cease to exist on the day that the plan takes effect, and there'll be an election and new board members will be elected. Now, there are a number of ways you can do that. You can set up districts. You can have a situation where you say, we have to be guaranteed 2 board members from the old Oldham-Ramona area, 2 board members from the old Rutland area, and 1 board member at large. You can do that, or you can elect all the board members at large. I will tell you from talking to schools that have done it where there's districts, there's a lot of angst from that. I'll give you a quick example. Viborg-Hurley is a consolidated school district, much in the same way that you guys are talking about doing it. And they decided that they were going to guarantee Hurley 2 board members, they were going to guarantee Viborg 2 board members, and they were going to elect 1 at large. Well, what happens is every time a decision is made, the Hurley people are expecting their board members to vote against it if there's something for an improvement that happens in Viborg. And the Viborg board members are kind of expected to vote against it if there's an improvement going to happen in Hurley. And so even though board members might think it's a good idea, whatever it is they're going to do, they feel obligated to vote that way, and it creates a lot of hard feelings in the district. So that's something that you'd want to think about when you get ready to decide how you want to elect your board members. Address the complete hiring of staff. So common sense would tell you that if the 2 old school districts are no longer in effect when the plan comes into play, that all of the employees of each district would lose their jobs. And so they would all get a notice in February or March of that year saying that the Rutland district will no longer be in existence. The Oldham-Ramona district won't be in existence. And so everyone will lose their job. And then they reapply for a job at the new Oldham-Ramona Rutland School District. And again, this happens every time there's a consolidation. Where and how much cost savings will there be? That has to be written into the plan. The Department of Education makes the school districts identify where and how much money will be saved in this process. And then the obligations of any pre-existing debt. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But if there were to be any pre-existing debt before the consolidation, the debt remains with the district where it arose in the first place. But that's not going to be an issue. We'll cover that in a minute. And then the second step is the plan must be approved by the Department of Ed, and then both school boards, and then a vote by the public. So another way of reorganization is what's called dissolve and attach. Now, this is usually a last option for a school district. And it's happened a ton in our state. As I mentioned, we had 3,000 school districts at one time. A lot of those districts no longer exist because they decided to dissolve and attach. So let me play out a scenario. If Oldham-Ramona and Rutland were to continue to operate for the next 5, 6, 7 years independently, and I firmly believe they could do that for the next 4 or 5 years, but they know what's projected for enrollment coming down the pike. And what will happen is, and there's a couple of districts, I won't mention their names right now, that are struggling. They can't find anybody willing to consolidate with them because they've gotten so small that there's no incentive anymore for the neighboring district to consolidate, and they will likely dissolve and attach. This just happened up the road in Grant Dual. Grant Dual waited and waited and waited, and finally they couldn't find a dance partner, if you will. And so they dissolved. Half the district to the north went to Millbank, and the southern half went to the Dual School District in Clear Lake. If that happens, the land must be contiguous. So I know sometimes people say, well, if we dissolve and attach, then I'll just decide to go to the ABC school district because I've looked and their taxes are lower. But you don't have that option because the land must all be contiguous. Now, it wasn't that long ago when the Rutland School District dissolved and attached. They went to Langford, they went to Webster, they went to Groton, they went to Britton Hecla, and the law did not say you had to be contiguous at that time. And now if you look at the old Roslyn district, it's just a checkerboard where, you know, it must be awful for county auditors because there's a quarter here that goes to this district and the next quarter goes to this one. And so the state legislature changed that law, and now your land must be contiguous. And then the last or the third way of reorganizing a school district is what's called a joint powers agreement. This is relatively new legislation, hasn't been around that long, and we only have one district in South Dakota that's taking advantage of this right now. It's the South Central School District, or you might know it by the name of Bonesteel Fairfax. They changed their name a few years ago and to South Central, but it's the communities of Bonesteel and Fairfax. They came to the conclusion that they were going to consolidate with the Burke School District. And this happened, I don't know, a decade ago. And what they found is that they receive heavily impacted aid money, which is federal money that they give them for one of like three reasons: a high Native American population, a high number of people that work in federal government jobs, or to replace property taxes due to flooding that was caused when they put the dams on the Missouri River. And so they receive a lot of federal money. If they were going to consolidate with Burke, they would have lost that federal money. So they came up with this joint powers agreement. And so what they do is they tuition all of their 6th through 12th grade students go to Burke. Now, the good news is Bonesteel Fairfax or South Central gets to keep their impact aid money that they receive from the federal government. However, they lose their identity for all of those students, grades 6 through 12. They are now Burke students. They get a Burke diploma. They're Burke graduates. They have nothing to do with South Central. And basically then South Central is running a K-5 school. Now, this has been working really well for both Bonesteel Fairfax and Burke, but in talking to the two superintendents, they can see the end of this, where Bonesteel Fairfax will ultimately have to dissolve and attach to Burke or to completely consolidate because the numbers are going to dictate that. So let's talk about a little bit of your existing financial data. And please, folks, take these numbers with a grain of salt because these were at a point in time and these numbers change all the time. So these are the numbers I had at one time, and I'll try to tell you if they're different than what I have up here. So each of the school districts represented here tonight have opt-outs. Rutland currently has a $310,000 opt-out, and that opt-out is time limited. Typically an opt-out is passed for 4 or 5 years, and at the end of that 4 or 5 years, the school district and the school board have to decide if they need it again, or if they need the same amount, or if they need more or less. And then the public, every time that comes up, the public has a right to refer that to a vote. There is another type of opt-out that are called perpetual opt-outs, and those were in place prior to the legislature changing the law. Those are not subject to a vote of the people any longer, and as long as the school district keeps them on the books, they get to keep those. So Rutland has a total of 30,000 in opt-out between the time-limited one and the perpetual. Oldham-Ramona, 200,000, and it's a perpetual opt-out. They don't have a time-limited one. So the question then that I would pose to the community is, how long is this sustainable? And will it be sufficient? Will these opt-outs be sufficient going forward? So the example I like to use is the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, designed a funding formula that's based on the number of students that we have. And when they designed the formula, they designed it to say that we'll give you enough money to run a school, but the only way it really works is if we're going to have 25 students in every classroom. And if you have less than 25 students in every classroom, then you're going to have to figure out another way to make up the difference in money. And therein lies the opt-outs. And opt-outs are a fairly new phenomenon. They haven't been around that long. But when the legislature changed the funding formula for the first time in 1995, and then the second time a few years back, it's all based on student numbers. And again, it's based on having 25 students in a classroom. So is it sustainable? And will the school boards have to come to the public and say, we lost another 10 kids through declining enrollment? Another 10 kids for our size, our small schools, is about $7,000 per kid, so $70,000. Well, how would a school district come up with that $70,000 other than coming back and saying, we need a larger opt-out? Because what happens is when you lose 10 kids, it might be one kid per grade level. It's not 10 kids all from the same grade. And so let's say we had 14 third graders in a classroom and one kid moved away, there's 13. Well, I can't eliminate a teacher because I've gone from 14 to 13. And so that's the problem that school districts are facing. How about capital outlay? The reason I bring up capital outlay, that's the part of the budget that school boards are allowed to ask for. Again, this law has changed recently, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But they've also given flexibility to school districts to say to their community, we're going to tax for X amount of dollars in capital outlay. But oh, by the way, we're going to let you beg, borrow, and steal from your capital outlay to help fund your general fund. And so they're allowing us as school districts to say, we're going to take the money that was designed to build buildings, that was designed to buy buses, to buy computers, all of those things, and they're allowing us to use it for the general fund because they know that it's local tax dollars, it's not state tax dollars, and they know that not every school district has 25 kids in every classroom, and therefore they need to take advantage of this. So how much have your requests been reduced due to the 3,400 per student law? And again, I know I'm getting into the weeds, folks, and so I apologize. There's a lot of data here and a lot of numbers. But fairly recently, the legislature changed how school districts could tax in their capital outlay. And many of our small districts had to reduce the tax burden on the taxpayers, which I'm sure is music to your ears, but it caused the school districts to lose revenue. And your two school districts are no exception to that. Now they are capped at, I believe the new number is $3,414, and it's tied to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So next year it's going to go up by 2.4%. But that's the cap that they have to live within. It used to be that a school district could simply say, we can tax up to $3 per thousand in capital outlay. And many of our small schools did because they were able to use that extra money for flexibility. But that's no longer a possibility. So right now, between the two school districts, and I say right now when I got this data, this could have changed, 337 students between the two schools. What most people would consider to be perfect for size because it's almost exactly 25 kids for every classroom. If you take kindergarten through 12th grade, that's 13 grades times 25 kids, that's 325 students. So you would almost be perfect. Under that scenario, using the $3,414 rule, the school districts could, and they're not at the max, but they could ask for $1,145,000. I put that up there because I'm going to come back to that. Okay, how much of the capital outlay are you flexing to the general fund? That's what I was talking about. How much can they steal out of the capital outlay to help their general fund? Fortunately, neither of your schools are currently doing this. I believe that Rutland had it in their budget to do that, and they ultimately did not do it. So neither school is doing that right now. Oldham-Ramona just paid off their debt. So as I said earlier, any existing debt, when a consolidation happens, stays with the existing taxpayers. And I was just updated recently, that number I have up there of 582,000 for Rutland, that's old data. The number is more like 380,000. 200,000 of that has been paid off. And whatever the balance is, I've been assured that if you consolidate, they'll pay that debt off before the consolidation would take place, which will make the taxpayers happy and will make the county auditor really happy. So just to give you a little bit of an example, the assessed valuations combined between the two school districts is $521 million. The assessed valuation of the school districts is the accumulation of all of the value of all the land and the homes and the businesses within a school district boundaries. If the two districts were put together under the old law, they would have been able to ask for $3 per thousand in capital outlay. Under the new law, the max that they can ask you folks for is 0.222 under the new law. And the new law, as you can see on the bottom row there, is 337 times $30,414. Okay, and again, I'll refer to that again. So if the two districts were to consolidate and they were to put together a plan, they were put it out to the voters, and the voters said, yes, let's do this. One of the options they would have would be to build a new school, again, between the two schools. And the reason that's part of the conversation is both of the main buildings on the existing schools are both over 100 years old. And I'm told that particularly in Oldham-Ramona School District, their main building they've been told by structural engineers that they have a very finite time that they're able to stay in that building without major renovations to it. And of course, once you start doing renovations, these buildings are not handicap accessible. They don't meet ADA requirements. And so the minute you start doing any major remodeling in the buildings, they all have to be brought up to code. So elevators would have to be added, et cetera. So based on 2022 estimates, and I'm going to turn this over to Kyleraff from Co-op Architects in just a minute, but based on those estimates, a new building could be constructed for approximately $18.3 million. How would we pay for that $18.3 million? How would the two districts pay for that? Well, you would do it in two ways. $7.8 million in capital outlay certificates. And when you hear the word capital outlay certificates, that means the school board has to make those payments from within their existing budget. You cannot raise taxes and ask the taxpayers to pay off capital outlay certificates. So that would be taken care of within their existing budget. It would not raise taxes. The other part would be paid for by a bond, $10.5 million bond. So let me reiterate before I go any further that in order to have a new school, it's going to take 2 votes. First, you're going to have to vote as the 2 districts that you want to consolidate. Once you've consolidated, the new school board would bring a proposal to the patrons again and say, okay, now we're consolidated. Now we'd like to pass a bond to build a new school. To vote to consolidate just takes a simple majority. So 50% plus 1 can consolidate a school district. But to pass a bond, in other words, to say to yourself, I'm going to vote yes to raise my taxes, that takes 60% to pass that. So if you were to do that and pass a bond, you could have a $10.5 million bond, and the payments on that would be $540,000 a year or $480,000 a year, depending on whether you financed it on 20 or 25 years. Now, I'm a conservative farm boy from, and so I don't like spreading debt out any farther than I absolutely have to. The one thing I will tell you is we have an anomaly right now going on where the interest rates, first of all, are historically low. The rates on these bonds, as we speak today, are under 2%. The rate is the same whether you went 20 years or 25 years. And I've never seen that. It's kind of like when you buy a house or buy a quarter of land, the longer you spread it out, usually the higher the interest rate. But right now, that's not the case. All these figures are based on today's rates, capital outlay revenue. So here's that number again. The school district could generate $1,146,000. They could generate that if they thought they needed it. I happen to think they won't. And so your taxes could go down in this regard. 476,000, and by the way, I rounded off up there to 480. 476,000 of that would be a certificate payment. That would leave the school district $670,000 to do things like buy their buses and buy their computers. Well, I'm here to tell you, if they're in a brand new school, they're not going to need $670,000. So they won't be requesting the maximum. At least I wouldn't think so. Bond payment, again, 540 or 480, depending on the number of years that they decide to finance it. But here's the most important number tonight, I think. Currently, between the 2 school districts, you're paying $630,000 in opt-outs. Those go away. Those automatically cease to exist under a consolidation. So that $630,000 is going to go away. The bond payment would either be, again, 540 or 480. So the bond payment to build the new school, to have your kids go to school in, will be less than what the opt-outs are. Now, I heard somebody say, hey, I hear we can put a new school up and send our kids there and lower our taxes. And I would just caution everybody that, yes, that's true for some people. Some people's taxes are going to go down under this scenario, but I can't guarantee everybody's are going to go down. They're not going to go up, but they might not all go down, and here's why. If you remember the slide where I showed you that Oldham-Ramona has a $200,000 opt-out, but they have the larger assessed valuation. And there's 2 opt-outs in Rutland, but you have the smaller assessed valuation. So Rutland's taxpayers, I can guarantee you your taxes are going to go down because you're paying the larger opt-out currently. Oldham-Ramona is paying a smaller opt-out. So I'd have to sit down and do the math on a parcel by parcel basis. What I do know is when you look at the 2 districts combined, the total taxes paid between the 2 districts under this scenario are going to be less than what you're currently paying. And your kids are going to be going to school in a brand new school. So what do you suppose spurred this conversation between the 2 schools? My guess is that the superintendents and the school boards have been talking about what are the projections for our enrollment for the next 3 to 5 years. And I think, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think they would tell you that we're concerned about the projection of our enrollment over the next 5 years. What will happen? And then if we go back to our taxpayers and ask for even more, if our enrollment declines, will they accept that or will they say no? What kind of programming would you like to have your students have, your kids? What kind of programming in the school that you do not have today that you could potentially have if you were consolidated? Because I'm here to tell you folks, you're going to have the ability to have programming if you consolidate that you can afford individually. And the best way I can say it is both districts have approximately 20 teachers. 85% of the entire budget of the two school districts, if not more, is made up of salaries and benefits. 85%. So the only way a district can save any money is to cut staff. Well, you would cut staff as a combined school because if each school district has 20 teachers for a combined 40, the consolidated district might have 30 teachers. And so your students are actually going to have more programming availability, but you're going to save money as a district. Now, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I know that there are probably elementary teachers that are thinking, well, right now there's a kindergarten teacher, a first grade teacher, a second grade teacher, and so on in Rutland, and the same in Oldham-Ramona. And I'm sure they're thinking to themselves, one of us could lose our job. And we would be lying to you if we didn't say, yes, that's very possible. There are two superintendents sitting up here. The district won't need them both. And so on and so forth. There are two business managers sitting up here, and the district won't need both. They won't, at least they won't need a business manager. You know, one will be able to do the job. Now, will there need to be an assistant? Will there need to be a principal? All of those things, yes. But it's the only way this works, and the only thing that makes any common sense is that there would be staff savings. You would be running one kitchen instead of two kitchens. You know, you would, you know, and so on and so forth. I could go on and on. The custodial, you know, there are going to be people that will lose their job if you decide to do this, but your district will be much more efficient and your students will have more opportunities. And I just listed some things here that you might be thinking, hey, that would be nice if we had some programming in those areas. Special ed, and you're going to see on the very last slide I showed tonight why I'm talking to you about mill levies and your taxes. I want you to know, first of all, that your school boards are already currently doing everything they can to try to keep your taxes down. You're one of few districts in the state that can afford to not tax for the maximum in special ed. And special ed is a levy that's used for special education, and the state sets the maximum, which is 1.616 mils. And you can see where your districts are at. So they've lowered your taxes there. You're not at the max in capital outlay. So I want you to know, whether you end up consolidating or not, your boards are doing everything they can to try to hold the line on taxes, but they're hamstrung in the fact that they have to have a certain amount of teachers and administrators to run the place, and the funding formula just doesn't work for that. So potential questions. What do the parents get for agreeing to a consolidation? And I say parents because here I'm talking about the students. Why consider and investigate pursuing this? Well, I would say it never hurts to look at something. It doesn't mean that ultimately the boards are going to agree to do it, or ultimately you as voters are going to agree to pass it, but it doesn't hurt to look at your options. I put a new K-12 facility in red there because to me, that's one of the biggest selling points for you as a community to be considering, for your students to be able to go to school there. And I've had this conversation with many different school districts over the years. And I always remind us of this, and I say remind us of this. When you stop and think about 100 years ago, so in 1920, a school board decided they were going to build those buildings in your communities, your main buildings. What an undertaking that was back then, and how much forethought did those folks have back then to think about what can we do that would sustain our school and our community for the next 100 years. I think it's pretty amazing, some of the buildings that were built. Can we increase academic offerings? Absolutely. Additional staff versus current separate districts to provide better student opportunities. That's what I just explained a little bit ago. Reduce total administrative and staffing costs. That's going to be one of the advantages of this. Greater district efficiency, better class sizes. We all know that we all like small class sizes, but there is such a thing as too small. You know, you have a class of nine students in it, and it might have 7 girls and 2 boys, or vice versa. And that's just that's not great for a social environment for kiddos. Future stability to ensure the district long-term. So I would suspect there are some people from Oldham, and again, having done this for a long time and being an old guy, but there's some people from Oldham are probably thinking, yeah, when we consolidated back in 1990, we thought this was going to take care of it for a long, long time. And here we are, you know, talking about this tonight. I think that's why, you know, looking at the class sizes of 25 and having a 1-section school that's full, that works. And we have examples of this around the state, by the way. The Warner School District, 10 miles south of Aberdeen. They always have 325 to 340 kids, and they always have money because the formula works for that size school. And they've got a lot of great programming. Stability to ensure the district long-term, eliminate the opt-outs. This program would eliminate your opt-outs. And then sustainability. Commonly asked questions. What is our district ready to give up or compromise on to facilitate a consolidation? Can the communities agree to have students educated in a new site outside of the existing communities? So if this were to take place under this scenario and a new school were to be built, there would not be a school there's already not in Oldham, there would not be in Ramona, and there would not be in Rutland. It would be somewhere in the country like the Tri-Valley School District is currently. Will our combined enrollment numbers increase? So, you know, that's the old adage, the Kevin Costner Field of Dreams, buildeth and they will come. You know, that's a question, not a statement, but I think you'll find that if you have a new facility, let's just say hypothetically, it's somewhere on North Highway 81, north of Madison, you know, north of here, however many miles it takes to make it make sense between the two districts, you're already receiving open enrolled students from Madison. I can't imagine that with a new facility that those numbers wouldn't increase. But on the flip side of that, you may find that a parent that lives north of Oldham might say, well, now my kid has to be on the bus even farther to go to this school. I'm going to think about going to Lake Preston. And so you may lose some kiddos on the fringes, and you may pick up kids from Madison. Will our kids get more opportunities in extracurricular activities? I suspect that they would. If you were combined and had that number of students, they probably would. Will there be more academic offerings? Again, I would suggest that if we look at other schools of that size, they have more academic offerings than either of you have separately. How will transportation be handled? All that has to be in the plan. How are we going to figure out busing? Where are the students going to go? How much money will it save? We talked about that. Can we eliminate the opt-outs? You can see I have an emphatic yes on there, because if they're not in the consolidation plan, they cease to exist. Will the tax savings make the bond payments for the new school? Yes. Will the tax savings make the bond payments for the new school? Yes. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Kyleraff, and he's going to answer some questions for you. I posed a bunch of them up here, and he's going to visit with you a little bit about if you were to consolidate and if you were to decide to build a new school, what's the timeline for that and what might it include? So Kyleraff is a principal architect at Co-op Architects. He's one of the owners there, and he's got the answers for you tonight.
More questions than answers. Thanks, Tom. As Tom mentioned, he mentioned Tri-Valley School District, and they've run a successful school in a rural area for decades now. We're currently working with that district, and we're working with over 30 school districts. So that's kind of how we came up with, and I consider this just a scope of magnitude at this point. We haven't met with staff, we haven't met with administration about what should be or shouldn't be included. We've simply taken from our experience working with different districts, what is a one section K-12 typically include and about how large would it be? So this is strictly just based on that and that square footage, and then what that would be in kind of today's dollars to build to come up with this. So Tom had posed quite a few questions. The biggest question and the biggest unknown for us would be, where's this going to be? Where's the site? And that would be part of this entire process, is finding a site for the school. And part of that would be, is natural gas available? Rural water? Would we have sanitary sewer, or would we have to do lagoons? Electric, is that available? Do we have enough water pressure for fire protection? So there's a lot of things that would go into this site selection, and that would have a big bearing on what would be included in the scope of the school. And all that stuff, we have no idea at this point, but those were the things that we would have to go through as part of this process. So in those dollars that Tom had mentioned, we kind of just used our experience from those other districts and what would be typically included in a K-12. And that would include obviously an administration area, classrooms for one section. We would typically suggest having a couple flex classrooms, because birth rates don't come out, so there's exactly 25 kids in first grade. You're going to get a big class that might cycle through and might have to be split into two sections. Cafeteria, commons, full serving kitchen. We would typically see and have included two gyms, a competition gym and then an auxiliary gym for both PE and doubleheader competitions, that kind of thing. We typically see 4 locker rooms, kind of the 2 varsity and sport lockers, and then 2 middle school, lower level, and PE locker rooms. We would also, this would include a media center and shops, and all this we would have to go through with everybody that's involved to get into the specifics. But we've just done this as basically a scope magnitude to figure out just a starting point. And that's how we estimated that square footage. We did include 2 gyms. The price does include track and field, and then there's a million options with that. How much seating do we need? Is it 4 lanes or 8 lanes? Seed, sod, turf. There's just 1,000 options. But it would also have a playground, bus pickup, drop off. And this is just a diagram. We don't have a site, so I can definitely guarantee it won't look like this at all. But essentially, you'd have a school with parking, bus drop off, parent drop off, playground. We would plan for any future expansion. If the district should grow or facility needs to change, track and field, practice fields, field events. But this layout would all be dictated about the site selection. And then one of the main questions would be, if the consolidation passed and then a bond vote passed, how long would it take to build the school? So backing up from that, the first thing would be the site selection. So assuming that we could select a site and the district could purchase that site, design takes roughly 6 to 8 months, and then construction is roughly 15 to 18 months. So if you, in July of 2022, the district's and the public decided to consolidate and you started that process, you would basically could be ready by fall of 2024.
Thank you, Kyle. I also have Tom Grimman here with us tonight, and he's from Colliers. And Tom is Colliers Financial. They are the company that many school districts use if they do decide to borrow money for anything. Those are the folks that take care of that. And I asked him to also be here tonight because you may have questions here as soon as I wrap up. And there's questions that either Kyle or Tom will be able to answer that I may not be able to. So what are the next steps? Well, each school board must vote to proceed with the development of a proposed consolidation plan. So when they leave here tonight, based on your feedback, and my suspicion would be feedback that you give them not only tonight, but between now and the next school board meeting, either in June or July, the next step would be that for them to pass a motion to say, we want to proceed with the development of a plan. And again, I think it's really important for everybody to understand that doesn't mean anything really other than they're developing a plan. Because ultimately, if they develop a plan, you get to vote on it. The voters are going to decide this, not the school boards. The school boards will decide to develop a plan. They'll decide to approve the plan. They'll decide to send it to the Department of Education. Department of Ed will decide whether to approve it. But ultimately, you guys get to decide whether it moves forward. So that would be the next. And then each board would typically name a committee, 2 members from the board so that they can meet and not have to schedule school board meetings every time they do it. Typically, the superintendents and principals are involved, usually a teacher from each of the schools, a community member from each of the schools, and try to keep the committee around 12 members, so 6 from each school district. And again, those are all decisions the board would make. These are just simply suggestions. The committee would meet 3 to 4 times a month to form a plan, and then they would present the plan to the board. The board would then give the committee feedback and say, we like A, B, C, and D, but we don't like E. We want you to fix that, and so on and so forth. Once they get it to the point where the boards are fairly comfortable with it, then they are required to have public meetings just like this and to roll the plan out and say, here's what we've come up with. Here's why we came up with that. Take feedback from the community. And then ultimately, once all those steps have been taken, then the board could vote then to pass that plan, meaning pass it to send it to the Department of Education. Once that is done, then the board or the Department of Education has to approve it, and then a date is set for the election. And the date would be the same day in both school districts for the election. See if the consolidation plan would pass. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that even if the new school board decides that they want to build a new school, the plan has to call out for where the kids will go to school between the time the consolidation takes place and when the new school is built. And I would remind you that they will not be able to operate independently the way they are today, because as I've said, if the consolidation passes, the opt-outs go away. So on day one of the new school district, they're going to have to be more efficient. Now that might look like a million different things, but one possibility would be all the K-5 students go to one of the sites. All of the 612 students go to the other site. That's one possibility. But they're going to have to do something on day one because they're going to lose $630,000 in opt-outs the day that consolidation passes. And as Kyle just said, In a perfect world, if the new board says we're going to build a new school, we're going to have a bond election, and we're going to build it, well, that takes 2 years. So for 2 years, you got to have a plan for where the kiddos are going to go to school. Okay, the plan passes. What do we do until a new school is built? Sorry, I got ahead of myself there. But I will skip right down to the last one here. Is it possible that a consolidation passes and then the bond vote fails? In other words, we decided as districts that we want to consolidate. We think it's a good idea. But then the vote comes to build the new school, which means passing the bond to raise taxes. What happens if that fails? Well, then you would continue to operate, at least in the short term, the way that the plan called out for in the beginning. For example, all the K-5 are in one site, all the 6-12 are in another site. You have to, if this passes, you're going to have to figure out how to be more efficient. Otherwise, you won't have the money to operate. Timeline. We're in June right now. If the boards in June board meeting, and these are all hypothetical, folks. These are Tom Oster timelines. These are not the school boards. They haven't vetted this. They haven't said, yep, that's the timeline we're going by. I just put up there what could be the fastest timeline possible, but it does not need to be this. It could be a year later. But if they both voted in June to create the plan, both boards would review the committee prepared plan in September. There would be public meetings in October. Both boards in November would send the plan to DOE. In January, both districts would conduct the vote. So you could have a vote as soon as January as to whether you wanted to consolidate. If you said yes, then you'd have to set up the election of a new school board, and that could be in February. Both boards and the new board will operate simultaneously until July 1, 2022, because the consolidation effective date would be July 1 of 2022. So the Oldham-Ramona board would operate, the Rutland board would operate, and the new board would operate for those few months. March through July of 22, the new board sets about implementing the plan and begins the process of hiring new administration. And then typically the new administration would begin hiring the staff for the new consolidated school. In July of 22, the new board will consider the cost of construction and subsequent bond vote to enable the new district to build a new K-12 school at a to be determined site. That's just a possibility then that the board could do that as early as July of 22. And that's why Kyle gave you the number. If they did that and the vote passed, you could move into the new building in in August of 24. And then the students would attend the predetermined site until the new school is completed. And when I say predetermined, whatever the plan said that you voted on, that's where the kiddos would go to school until the new school was built. So there might be somebody in the audience again that's saying, yeah, you know what, the heck with it. Let's just let it ride for as long as we can. And 4 or 5 years from now, we'll just dissolve and attach and go to our neighboring districts. So I thought it was important to share with you the reality that taxes aren't necessarily cheaper in your neighboring districts. For instance, we're in the Madison School District right here. They are maxed out on their capital outlay. They're maxed out on their special ed. Neither of these districts are maxed out. They have a bond payment. Neither of these districts have a bond payment, and they have an opt-out. Both of these districts have opt-outs. Sioux Valley is maxed out in their capital outlay and in their special ed, and they have an opt-out. Lake Preston, maxed out in special ed. They have a reduced capital outlay, just like these two schools do, and they have an opt-out. Brookings, maxed out in capital outlay, maxed out in special ed, have a bond payment, and they have an opt-out. Chester, maxed out in special ed and capital outlay, they do not have a bond or an opt-out. And Chester is a unique school district in that they run a cyber school where they educate high school students at many, many, many Hutterite colonies. And that is a great generator of revenue for them. Unfortunately, that's not something that every school can copy and do. They've got the market on that. Arlington, maxed out special ed, maxed out capital outlay. They have a bond payment and they have an opt-out. This would be projected for your new ORR school district. Lower than a max special ed, lower than a max capital outlay, no opt-outs, but you would have a bond payment. So separately combined, it's not like there's a panacea out there of a neighboring school district to attach to, I guess was my point here. With that, I will open it up to the boards for questions and the audience.
So I'd ask if Mr. Johnson's over on the east wall with the microphone. So if you do have a question or comment, we'd ask to let Mr. Johnson know and we'll get a microphone.
You want to tell you and he calls up there? Okay. What I want to know is, do you have to be a resident of the district in order to vote at these things? Even if you're a property owner? If you're out of the district, you can't vote, right?
That is correct, sir.
So,
So I should repeat the question because the people on Zoom can't hear your question. The question was, if you do not live in the school district, but you own land in the school district, are you allowed to vote? And the answer is state law is very clear on that. That's not a decision the districts get to make. You have to live in the district to be registered to vote in the district in order to vote.
okay, well, that's kind of what I thought, but I want to check for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good question.
Yes, these figures that you're quoting as far as for prices, interest rates and all that, can I ask, just how far back do those figures come from? Because what happens if we get suddenly increased material, building materials, which you're having right now, which is almost going out of sight. Interest rates, that's been projected all over the place for upcoming years. So are we up? Looks to me like that's a little bit optimistic. What's the plans for if cost of living suddenly goes way on up 4-10% possible of this spending at the national level is my feeling on it.
So the question was, where did the numbers come from? And I'm assuming he's referring to the numbers on the projected cost of a new facility. And then he also asked, are you concerned about the interest rates? Can they fluctuate? Well, there's no question. I mean, first of all, thank you for the question. It's a good question. It's just like anybody else. It's just like a farmer looking at the cost of a new combine. I think the only thing that we're pretty sure is everything goes up, except maybe commodity prices. They go down. But again, I grew up on a farm. I know what that's like. I can't predict what's going to happen right now. We are seeing prices going up. We had a different number in here 6 months ago, and we've adjusted that number for what we've seen with construction inflation. I have no idea though what it will look like in 2024, nor would the school districts be able to predict if Oldham-Ramona, for instance, has to put $1 million into their building in order to not have it condemned. They can't predict what that number will look like in 2024 either. So it's a great question, but the answer is I don't know what the inflationary rate will be, and I can't predict what interest rates will be. I can tell you that for 10 years, I've been thinking that interest rates have to go up. I mean, they just have to. I've never seen it like this. Well, I can tell you, I borrowed money on my first house and interest rates were 18% in 1982. So I can't imagine that they're going to stay at 2% or less forever. But I've been saying that for 10 years. So great question, but don't know the answer. Yes.
My question is about the enrollment levels. As a consolidated school district, you're saying the projection is 337 students. How many of those students, a breakdown, actually live in the district? How many are open enrolled, which bump the numbers? And then what's the projection? I mean, that's the idea that we need a consolidation, is because projected we need to combine so we can efficiently run the schools, but what is that projection for enrollment down the road?
The question was the number, that the projected number of the consolidated number 337. Just to be clear, that was not a projected number of enrollment. That's the combined enrollment of the two districts as they exist today. So it's not a projected number for on day one of the new consolidated school. To answer your question, yes, both districts have a large number of open enrolled students that are currently coming into the current districts. And that's why I think my projection would be, and you'd have to ask the schools what they think. But my thinking is, from what I've seen from around the state, is that if you consolidate and you build a new school somewhere between the two schools, you're going to lose some of those students that are on the fringes of the district. What fringes meaning the furthest away students. Common sense just tells me, and past practice tells me, you're going to lose some of those students. But you'd be surprised if a student is a fourth or a fifth grader and they've got all their friends and that they've gone to school with forever, there's going to be a lot of pressure on those parents from their students, from their children, to say, I want to stay with those kids. Those are the kids I know, and whatever. The parent might be thinking, now I got to drive another 6 miles or whatever the case might be. But we see that happen all the time, where once those kids get established with that cohort, they'd like to stay with them. I can't predict how many of those kids won't come any more than I can predict how many extra kids you're going to get from Madison, for instance, because of the proximity and because it's brand new. So great question. Unfortunately, I just don't have a magic ball that I can look at.
I can kind of, as far as I think that she asked, as far as how many are currently for both districts, based on the DOE website, the numbers they have for the Oldham-Ramona district, there's currently 17 students that open enroll out and 22 that open enroll in. For the Rutland School District, there's 25 that open enroll out and 71 that open enroll in. So does that answer your question?
Oh, okay. Do you want to just read it?
Yeah.
That won't work.
Chat here. So the first question is just clarification on the voting and if open enrollment parents can vote. The first one.
So again, if you're open enrolled, that means you don't live in the district. And so if you don't live in the district, you're not registered to vote in the district, you can't vote on the consolidated plan.
And then the next question about open enrollment, it asks, are both schools maxed out on open enrollment? Will they be able to take more money or will they have to cut?
More students. No, neither district currently is maxed out on open enrolled students. I'm sure if I ask the superintendents and the school board members, if 10 more open enrolled kids showed up tomorrow, would you take them? And the answer would be absolutely. So typically a school district will accept open enrolled students until they get to that magic number of 25 kids per grade. Was there a question in there about funding? Okay. Anything else from online? I know I saw some more hands in the audience. It's so hard.
Mr. Oster, since you worked with the state in education, what is your opinion on the state's desire to continue to consolidate schools? Do you think they'll change the funding formula in the next 10 to 20 years where you're going to need 400 students, 500 students, or something like that to get the maximum state aid funding?
Well, the question was, what's my opinion on what the legislature will do with school funding, and will they change the magic number to be even higher, 400 or 500? The school funding formula, I'll do my best. The school funding formula changes about every 30 years. And it just changed, I mean, historically, it seems like about every 30 years they change it. That's the general fund part of it. They change the capital outlay, it seems like every time the wind blows. But to answer your question, the Secretary of Education prior to my time had a task force, and they put together a plan that said if you have a school district of less than 100 students, you cannot operate. You had to be shut down. They originally started that conversation with 300, and then it went to 200, and they couldn't come close to getting the votes. They barely got it passed when it said 100. So I think it'll be a long time. The other thing that's going to keep the legislature from going too much further is geography. It gets to be too far apart for school districts to be able to consolidate conceivably once you get, beyond 20 miles, 25 miles one way. We already have that situation West River, and they already have an exception in there for what they call sparse schools. And if they're more than 20 miles away from another district, they don't force them to consolidate. So I don't think so. What would be my projection in the next 30 years? I don't see that happening, but again, I gave up a long time ago trying to predict what the legislature was going to do. Other questions? I think, did this gentleman, yes. Without open enrollment, I think, and I'll ask the superintendents, but I think in 5 years down the road, I think they're both expecting their districts to be smaller. To what extent, I'll let Brian and Mike speak to that. They couldn't hear Brian's answer on online. So basically what he said, and I'll try to paraphrase, they're projecting for the Rutland School District in the 5 years from now that they're thinking they would possibly be down 25 students from what they are currently today. But again, there's so many variables. A family of 5 moves in, 2 more open enrollments show up. You just can't, but their best guesstimate would be lower by 25.
And I'd say Oldham-Ramona would be about maybe 10 to 15, but it's hard to come up with that number when we go through and look at those, especially when you start projecting out that 4 or 5 years. So,
it used to be 25 years ago, you could do exactly what this gentleman was asking. You could say, we know that we've got 40 children from birth to 5 years old, and we know how many seniors are going to graduate each year for the next 5 years. 25 years ago, we did that all the time and it worked. But it's so much different today in every community in our state where the people are so much more transient where they move from district to district and town to town so much more than they used to that it's so hard to predict that. Yes, sir.
If both school districts are projecting that we're gonna lose students, by building a new school, are you gonna gain all them students plus enough to pay for? Some doesn't add up, we're losing kids, but if we build a new school, then all of a sudden all these kids are gonna come.
I don't think that would be a fair statement to say all these kids are going to come. I think the question would be, if you have 337 kids, again, hypothetical, between the two districts currently, and let's just say worst case scenario, that Rutland did in fact lose 25 and Oldham-Ramona did lose 15, that's 40 kids. That would leave you with 297 students, and there would be 80 school districts in South Dakota that would be smaller than you would be. 80 school districts that would be smaller than you would be at 297 students. So yes, you would still be very, very viable if the worst case scenario happened with both of those. In fact, I would even go further and say, and let's say that 10 Rutland students decided not to come because they didn't like the location of the new school. And 10 from Oldham-Ramona did the same. And now we're down to, instead of 297, we're at 277. You would still be a very viable, good-sized school district. And we haven't mentioned the fact that some kids are going to come that aren't currently in your district because you're going to have a brand new facility, you're going to have more program offerings than you currently have separately. So for every negative, there's a positive on student numbers.
Tom, before we go there, this kind of goes along with that. The question on the Zoom is, if you put a school on 81, is there the concern about losing students that live on the fringes of the two school districts?
And I think we've addressed that several times, and I don't think there's any question that if you put a school on North 81 or pick a spot any place between the two districts, somebody on the fringe, on the outskirts, is possible that they're not going to continue to come to the school. Just like it's possible that some other kids are going to come to your school, again, because it's brand new or because of the proximity to a Madison. I think there was a.
Yeah, my question actually is kind of related. When the school board comes up with their plan, will site selection be included in that plan? Because that may be a factor for people voting on this.
So that's a great question. The question was, in the plan, will it include site selection for the new school? And that is a wonderful question. And I honestly don't know the answer to that. Because the consolidation cannot dictate to build a new school. And so I don't know the answer to that. That's a question I would want to ask the Department of Education to say, could the board put that out there that this is the site we're thinking about, but it can't dictate that this will be the site because only the new school board can make that decision. So I understand completely what you're saying. You might say, well, if it's here, I'll vote yes. And if it's here, I'm going to vote no. But they really can't dictate that because the old boards can't dictate to the new board what they're going to do. You can dictate in the plan, in the consolidation plan, where the kids are going to go to school, but you can't dictate to build a new school because that takes a new vote with a 60% pass rate. Yes.
I was just wondering about if we would to build a new school in a new location, would we have to purchase land from somebody? And is that cost covered up there? You know, land's kind of expensive.
So the question was, if there's a new school built, would the school district have to purchase land? And the easiest answer to that, well, of course, they're going to need land someplace. And I'll defer to Kyle, but I'm guessing for K-12 one section school, 20 acres. So they're going to need about 20 acres. And I can tell you that in my other job, I actually have done that before for a school district, Tri-Valley, for instance. They were going to build an elementary school in or around Crooks. And I negotiated with several area farmers about purchasing that land. And a little bit different scenario because it was right near the community or right on the edge of the community. This would be more in the country likely. But you're correct that that would have to happen. But there are all kinds of creative ways to buy that land. There may be a farmer that says, you know what, I think this is a good idea. I will donate at least a portion of this land. And schools across the country have been very creative about making some kind of a designation on that land. For instance, the football field could be named after the people that donated the land. There are lots of ways to get creative with that other than just saying, hey, $8,000 an acre, 20 acres, here's the bill. Those would be options that the school could check out. But you're right, there definitely would have to be securing of some land to build this. Anything else online? Honestly, I don't have the answer to that. Oh, the question was, what happens to the old gymnasiums? I don't have the answer for that. I don't even know if these boards have gotten that far down the road. And let's be clear that that's just one option if there's a consolidation to consider a new building. I do think, again, with the condition of the Oldham-Ramona school, they've got to have to figure out to do something. And that's going to cost money one way or the other, whether they shore up that 100-year-old building or whether they put that money into a new facility. All I can tell you, though, is what I've seen in other small communities where they've built new. Sometimes they're turned over to the community. They become a community center. That's the most common for a gymnasium, is to be a community center. Does either of the boards want to address that any further? I don't know if you've had that conversation even. Yes.
I have two questions. The first one is, has there been any other school district that has approached either school about consolidation?
So the question was, has any other school district approached either of the boards concerning wanting them to consolidate with you? Oh, yeah. The question was, I think I repeated it, didn't I already? Yeah.
Yes, the Rutland School District has been reached out to from the Sioux Valley School District. I received a letter from Laura Schuster, who is their superintendent, after the two school boards had approved this community meeting. After they did see that, their school board had it on their agenda to discuss reaching out to the Rutland School District in regards to that possibility. Yes. And at this time, the Oldham-Ramona School District has not been in any contact with any other districts in regards to possible consolidations, just the Rutland School District.
The other question I had is, at one of the next meetings, could you provide a map that would show what the new school district would look at? I'm one of those, I am the fringe. I'm as southeast as you can go and be in the Rutland School District. I am 9 miles from Rutland. I'm 7 to Coleman. I am 37 miles from Oldham, and I'm 27 to Ramona. And those, I know Ramona Oldham district touches Howard, which is 40 miles away. So I would just like people to know just how large an area that the combined school district would be.
Thank you for the question, and absolutely. The question was, can the public see maps of the two current districts? And I would just I know the superintendents know this, but those maps are available on the Department of Education's website if you want to Google that. Oh, so she's already done that, but she wants everybody to be able to see that. So prior to the superintendent sending out that link, if you just go to the Department of Ed's website, you can do a search on there for school district maps and it'll pop up for you. But you guys can. Sure, sure. No, that's not a problem either. That's fine. I think if you would ask your school superintendents, if you want a map printed, they'll print one for you. No problem.
Mr. Oster, that was the same question we had over here. If a map could be put on both schools' websites as a PDF or something like that, just on their websites so people could access it.
Perfect. Yes. Got that, guys? Superintendents, put a map on your websites. But again, that doesn't answer this gentleman's question. He wants a printed map. And I'm sure that the business office can print a half a dozen or whatever it takes, and you just stop by the school and pick them up. Because it is nice to be able to see where the district boundaries are exactly and where they mesh, where the two districts mesh. Great question.
This question online is, are there any tax breaks in donating land to schools? If so, would this push a location given to them?
I am not an accountant, nor am I a tax attorney, but I know that there are availability of tax write-offs for gifting. So I would be shocked if that weren't the case. I don't know if Tom, can you address that? Or do you know if there are any tax write-offs if a landowner would donate land to have the school built there?
There probably is, but I'm not the guy to give that advice. Your financial advisor, personal financial advisor, but there definitely is a tax advantage if you donate, if you want to donate land, obviously. So up to a certain dollar amount.
Because school districts are public entities, I know if you donate land to a college or a university, you get a tax write-off for doing that. So I can't imagine it wouldn't be the same for a K-12 school. Great question, though. That was online.
Another question that came up is if it was possible to put those maps online now, or excuse me, up on the screen now, if that was possible.
They're working on it. We had a question right here. If you could. The question was, can you build a school legally on a major highway like that? And the easy answer is yes, but it wouldn't be on the highway. You would turn off the highway. You would have to have conversations with the State Department of Transportation about slow signs there, flashing signs. Sioux Valley School, if you know, is right on 14. It's like, you know, a block, half a block off on 14, but they slow everything down. And then the school entrance would be off of a road off of the highway, not right on the highway. I'm glad you brought that up though, because people do take it literally, but it wouldn't be right next to the highway. It would be built inset enough to resolve the issue you're thinking about. Thank you for that question. You should have some of these students come up here. They'd have it done already.
We have another question back here.
First off, I'd like to say that when you were showing the taxes, I didn't see Coleman Egan, and I know we have property in Coleman Egan, and our taxes are like a third compared to what we pay on the Rutland property. So that's just one thing. I didn't see Flanders either. I don't know if they're all similar. The other point I want to make is that I know Rutland is planning on this efficiency through the teachers and that the enrollment will come. And I think a lot of the draw for Rutland is the fact that they do have smaller numbers. That's what brings these open enrollments. And I think that has to be really taken with a bit of caution, that you assume when you get bigger numbers, they're going to be there anyway. So I'd just like to point that out, that that is a consideration.
Thank you for the question. The question was that the fact or statement that we didn't have Coleman Egan up there or Flandreau, and I apologize for not having them all up there. It's not possible for school district taxes to be a third of what they are in another district, because the state sets the tax rate for the general fund for all of us, for the entire state. And so there can't be that much variance between one district to another. However, I don't know, I just picked out a bunch that I knew touched the district. I did not omit any of them because they were higher or lower or whatever. But it would be easy to get you that information on where Coleman Egan and Flandreau are into that ranking, if you will. I just didn't have it there tonight. I apologize. But it would, again, it would not be possible for the school district taxes to be 1/3 of what they are in a neighboring district, simply because the state sets the levy for the general fund. So here are the maps. If you, hopefully, if you're back there ways, you can see that. Am I in your way here? The Oldham-Ramona district here obviously touches Arlington, Lake Preston, DeSmet, Howard, so I missed several districts, Madison, and Rutland. And then the Rutland district touches, of course, Oldham-Ramona, touches Madison, Chester, Coleman Egan. I don't think it touches Flandreau. It does touch Brookings and Sioux Valley and Arlington. Yes.
Coming from the student perspective, in these next few years, waiting for the new school to be built, assuming that the boards go through with it. If the schools get divided up into like K-5 and then 6-12, how are their schedules going to like change? Are you going to be eliminating programs that are offered at one school or the other? Like, for example, Rutland has FFA available, and if they were to send the 6-12 to, say, Ramona, would that then eliminate FFA for the 6-12 student body?
Perfect question, and thank you for asking it. From a student's perspective, the question was asked, if the school boards decide to go ahead with a plan, what will the programming look like? And I would submit to you that you'll actually have more programs than you currently have in either of your schools separately, because you're going to have more money to work with. But you also bring up another point. I don't think when I had that committee up there, I don't think I had students on there. And so you just reminded me that that would be really important to have a student representative from both districts as well, to make sure that nothing like that would happen. I can't imagine a plan being put together in my wildest dreams that wouldn't make sure that you maintain the programming that you have and be looking at what could we add to that. Because again, every time something in this plan upsets somebody, it's a potential no vote. For instance, if somebody thinks, well, what are you going to do with the gyms in the community? That could be a no vote. What are you going to do with FFA if it's not included? That could be a no vote. And so the boards and the committee members have to do everything they can to make this the best it possibly can be. And even then, it's tough to get it to pass because the unknown and people don't like change. And it's hard to say, right now, we have a school in Ramona or we have a school in Rutland and we don't want to lose that. And so it's hard to say, we're going to vote yes to put a school out there. And we only, a lot of times we look at it as I would do the same thing you're doing. If I'm a student, how is that going to affect me? Even though I'm only here 4 years and this decision is a 50-year decision, I'm here 4 years. I want to know how it affects me. And that's normal. It honestly is a normal reaction to have. Just like a teacher might look at it and say, I'm going to vote against this because I might lose my job. And I understand that completely. I might do the same thing if I were in that person's shoes. But I think we have to look at this from a 50-year perspective, not a 4 or 5 year perspective, because what will happen, how long can we limp along in the way what we're doing business right now? And then will we ultimately dissolve? And will Oldham-Ramona be part of DeSmet, Lake Preston, Arlington, Rutland, Madison, Howard someday? Or will Rutland, will that be the same thing? And I understand that there was a question earlier about, well, I like the really small class sizes, and that's why, my children go to Rutland, and I understand that. But sometimes we have to be careful what we wish for too. There is research out there that shows that students do better academically and socially if they're in a better size. We only think of small as better, but that's not always the case if you get too small. So thank you for that question. Definitely need to make sure we add students to that mix.
Another question from the audience members. One of the questions was that Oldham-Ramona has done a structural analysis. Has Rutland done structural analysis to their building as well?
The question was, has Rutland done any structural analysis to their building? Oldham-Ramona's already done that. I don't know the answer.
I have not, as super. That darn push button again. We have not, as of this year, I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago prior to me being superintendent. Right now, the structure right now is in good shape.
Another question from the audience was about the possibility of the 4-day school week that Oldham-Ramona has and Rutland does not. What would become of that?
Again, that would be a conversation that the two school boards would have to have. When I figured out that that was the case, there are going to be some people upset with that decision no matter what. There are going to be some people that like the 4-day that want to stay with it. There are going to be some people that are in a 5-day and don't want to go to a 4-day. So whatever that committee decides that they put in the plan, and that has to be written in the plan, whether it's going to be a 4-day week or a 5-day week. And frankly, what it could be is maybe a hybrid. What the two committees get together, it could be some kind of a hybrid that we're not going to go strict 4-day week. We're not going to go strict 5-day week. We're going to have some of both. I don't know the answer to that, but that would be a decision the committee would have to grapple with.
I have an online question. If consolidation goes forward, is there any possibility of each school keeping their own younger grades, at least until a new school is built?
Certainly a possibility. That, again, the two districts would have to get together, but I will remind you that somehow they're going to have to figure out how to save $630,000 because the opt-outs are going away. Taxes are going down when this consolidation happens. And so they're going to have $630,000 to have to figure out how to recoup that. And any district that's ever consolidated, if they try to run elementaries in 2 different sites, when they're a 1-section school, it doesn't work. Financially, it just doesn't work. Now, could you run your own kindergarten in each site? Maybe something like that would work. But again, that's something the committee would have to grapple with and figure out and do the math, figure out what they can afford and what they can't afford.
Mr. Oster, the question from the audience member was, can a consolidation and a bond vote be done at the same time?
I called the Department of Education to ask them that same question, because ideally, I think that's the way it should happen. They said they did not know. I asked one of the school attorneys in South Dakota. He hasn't gotten back to me. I figured that question would come up tonight. The department, like I said, the Department of Education deferred to a school attorney. Ideally, that would be really good, because then what you could do is put the start date of your consolidation far enough ahead. If the bond already had passed, you could put the start date of the actual combining of the schools far enough down the road to have the new school built. And then you wouldn't have those issues of, well, I don't want my kindergartner being on a bus to Rutland, or my, vice versa. So that's a question that we're going to have to get answered from a school attorney.
Another online question: if consolidated, will the bus still pick up every child like it does currently, or will there be more pickup and drop off locations instead?
Again, that would be part of the plan. Every child that's currently being picked up would be picked up by a bus. But where the routes ran and what order they ran in, that's all got to be in the plan that you would vote on. Are you paid to give us the pros and cons? Because it seems like you're more pro than con. Well, first of all, to answer the question was, am I paid to give pros and cons to this, or am I just paid to give the pros? And first of all, I haven't been paid anything. And I'm just doing this based on, and that's a legitimate question. It really is. It's a good question. I'm trying to tell you to the best of my ability from past experience, I have no dog in this fight. And so whatever you two districts decide to do, good for you. I mean, that's why you get to vote on it. What I can tell you is what I've seen in the past. And districts that dig in their heels and they won't do anything because we're going to stay independent, we're going to do our own thing. I don't want to have to, change anything. Yes, it is. What has happened to them is they end up with that other option, dissolve and attach. It happens. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. You can't stop it from happening. And so that's the only thing I can tell you is what I've seen in history. Now, it's different if you go West River. The Hovind School District has 102 kids, 103 kids. And even if they fall below 100, they're going to continue to exist because it's 40 miles to anywhere except Gettysburg, and they won't do anything with them. But they don't receive any state aid. They have such a massive assessed valuation, such a rich land base, they don't receive any state aid. And so even if the state said, you're below 100, we're going to take away your state aid, the district would say, well, go for it, because you're not giving us any anyway. So that's a different world out there, but I could just tell you, that's another thing that the schools can put out to you and show you what has happened in the last 40 years of the towns that used to have schools that are no longer there. And old gray hairs like me, I can rattle off tons of them. But you'd be surprised if you start reading that list and you're like, wow, they had a K-12 school, they had a K-12 school. And you're blown away by all the towns, names that you read in there. We drive through all the time now, and you see a little blurb, and that's all there is there. I used to be a firm believer. I hated all this consolidation talk as a small school guy. I hated it. And I used to think that the legislature, all they were trying to do is not spend any money. Well, when the funding formula changed in 1995, I changed my opinion because the state now, they don't care how many school districts we have because they're funding the kids. So whether your child goes to Ramona, Rutland, or Madison, they give X amount of dollars for those students. And so I should have brought that up earlier to the gentleman that asked the question, will they change it? No, they're basically put that number at that level to either force you to consolidate or starve you to death at some point. And again, you folks have all stepped up. I mean, your boards have stepped up and tried to lower taxes in capital outlay and special ed where they can. And then you've all stepped up and said, we don't want to lose our schools, so we're going to pass an opt-out. But there comes a limit to where, as a taxpayer, you can afford to do that and they're willing to do that. And there comes a limit to what is it that I don't want my kid to have for opportunities in my school because we can't afford it. Long-winded answer to your question. I'm sorry. One more chance to ask a question. Mr. Oster.
So we've talked about capital outlay. How does a consolidation usually affect the general fund? Would it bring our teacher salary up to more competitive wages compared to our surrounding districts?
The question was, with a consolidation, will our wages come up to be more competitive with our surrounding districts? And I would say absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. You're going to be able to do both. You're going to be able to bring the salaries up. Let me just give you a perfect example. I'll pick on Sioux Valley. The last place where I was a superintendent, when I arrived at Sioux Valley, our teachers' salaries were really bad. Comparatively to our size of a school district. Within 1 year, we eliminated 6 positions. Now you might think, well, that's just an awful thing to do. Well, some of them were eliminated because they retired, they left, they moved on, and we didn't fill them. And a couple of them we got rid of. The problem is Sioux Valley had their high school staffed as if it were a 3-section high school. But it was a 2-section high school, not a 3. Maybe at one time it was 3, but it was 2. So we eliminated 6 staff members. And our salaries went over a 5-year period. They went from being not very good at all to being better than Brookings. Now, I've been gone 5 years. I don't know where they are today, but I'm telling you, if you look, they're really good. It's easy math. You have more kids, you have more money. You combine them, you have more teachers than you do individually, but far fewer than you do collectively. And so therefore you can pay better. Anything from the boards? Well, I want to say thank you very much for, I know I blabbed up here a long time and it's hard to sit there that long and a lot of data. Great questions. Those are absolutely great questions. Apologize. I knew tonight when we got here that there was going to be questions we just don't have an answer to because you have to start playing out the process before you can answer some of those. But I appreciate everybody's attendance and asking the questions. As far as next steps, we covered that. I think both boards will have this on their agenda in their June board meeting. That doesn't mean they're going to take action, but I'm guessing they'll have a conversation about this going forward. Otherwise, Mike, Brian, anything from either of you? Kyle or Tom? I want to thank Kyleraff from Co-op Architects and Tom Grimman from Colliers as well for being here. I know they sat there a long time tonight, but I was afraid there'd be a question that I couldn't answer, and so we wanted to have them here as well. Thank you so much, folks.
Next monthly board meeting is Monday, June 14th at 4 p.m. Need a motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn at 8:48.
A second? All in favor, say aye. Brooke Albertson?
Aye.
Justin Devaney? Ryan Olson? Amanda Moss? Motion passes.
I was going to thank him for
coming. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and participating in our question and answer session. Everybody online that chimed into. It was great. It's really appreciated, and we need to know everybody's point of view and everything. Our next board meeting is June 14th, 2021 at 6 p.m. And adjournment. Who? Brian? What's that? All in favor, say aye. Lori?
Aye.
Brian Hanson? Brian Jeton? And we are adjourned.